Does the author have an ethical obligation regarding what they write, or is that obligation solely placed upon the reader? Trigger warning, this video includes a discussion around the sexual assault and rape of minors. I'm against paedophilia and child sex abuse. That shouldn't be a controversial statement. However, paedophilia and child sex abuse happens in every society, globally, historically, or modern. And as a detestable part of the human experience, authors shouldn't avoid writing about it. But when writing about such a topic, when should the author provide social commentary, and what should the reader bring to the novel themselves? I exist in a lot of bookish circles, and in one particular Facebook group, I see consistent praise for 3 novels that tackle this topic. Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, Kate Alice Russell's My Dark Vanessa, and Bryn Greenwood's All the Ugly and Wonderful Things. All 3 of these novels include a sexual relationship between an adult and a child, and I will be discussing that and the depiction of those relationships within the 3 books I mentioned. This is the second time I've mentioned a trigger warning. This will be the last. In 1955, when Nabokov published Lolita, it was met with controversy. Nabokov's depiction of Humbert, a man in his mid to late 30s, and his obsessive and sexual desire for the 12-year-old Dolores, was banned in several countries for obscenity, including France. Do you realize just how obscene a book needs to be to get banned in France? Critics at the time said the book promoted paedophilia and incest. Lolita is understandably still a controversial novel for a variety of reasons. And while those reasons have grown and evolved over time, the statement that it promotes paedophilia and incest seems to miss the point of the novel. You can only say Lolita promotes paedophilia and incest if you think it's a romance. If you think this book is not a condemnation of Humbert in his own words. If you absolve him of a crime. And in his narration, Humbert often diminishes his crime, but he never absolves himself of them. Nabokov wasn't the first author whose work was incorrectly interpreted as a romance. Heathcliff, Mr. Rochester, and Angel Clare are all commonly mistaken as male leads in a romance novel. Yet they're a representation of toxicity, possession, classism, and the patriarchy. Nobody should be calling Jane Eyre, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, or Wuthering Heights romance novels. Yet a quick Google suggests otherwise. It is perhaps Nabokov's poetic language that causes confusion within the reader. It's objectively lovely prose, and it's hard not to get swept up in. Lolita, life of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul, Lo-li-ta. The tip of the tongue takes a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 on the teeth. Lo-li-ta. She was lol, plain lol, in the morning, standing at 4 feet 10 in one sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted lines. But in my arms, she was always Lolita. You must remind yourself that she's 12. But 4 feet 10, is that the height of an adult? What about the mention of school? Nabokov is constantly taking you into Humbert's fantasy and bringing you back to reality. Nabokov's intention may have been to leave enough breadcrumbs for the reader to condemn Humbert, but once the book is published, the intention of the author is no longer relevant. The work exists separate to the author, and it will be interpreted by the readers. And interpret Lolita is exactly what 15-year-old Vanessa Y does when her 32-year-old English teacher, Jacob Strain, hands her a copy to read, using it as a tool to groom, seduce, and abuse her. My Dark Vanessa is different from Lolita in narration. Kate Elizabeth Russell chooses to give Vanessa the dominant voice of the novel, not her abuser. It is obvious that Nabokov's work has influenced Russell. She has heard the criticism of Lolita, and while Vanessa herself might have a hard time believing she was abused, the reader would need to be making a concerted effort to be under the same delusion. Because even if I sometimes use the word abuse to describe certain things that were done to me, in someone else's mouth the words turn ugly and absolute. It swallows up everything that happened. I think this is one of the most thought-provoking quotes I've ever read. The word abuse turns ugly and absolute when somebody else says it. Vanessa doesn't see it as entirely ugly or indeed absolute. The quote captures the ambiguity and contradictions of Vanessa's feelings and emotions. It demonstrates her existence in two states, but there's never enough ambiguity for you, the reader, to ever think, maybe Jacob Strain's alright. Even when Russell is examining the subjects that could be misinterpreted, she's providing you with enough guidelines so you can't. If Russell provides the guidelines that Nabokov was missing, then Bryn Greenwood removes them in All the Ugly and Wonderful Things. I wanted a fairy tale ending for Wavy, because if she could find happiness, there would be hope for me too. Wavy is 8 when she meets 21-year-old Callan. 6 years later, the two have sex. The two end up getting married in what is a fairy tale ending. Bryn Greenwood is an immensely talented writer who can definitely pull at the emotional strings. You're tempted to support Wavy's desire. It's just that Wavy's desire is an adult. One can almost feel the comparison to Humbert saying, "It was she who seduced me." The justification for pedophilia. The child initiated it. The full quote from Lolita is, "I'm going to tell you something very strange. It was she who seduced me." By saying it was very strange, Humbert is professing his surprise. He is labelling himself a predator. Nabokov is always providing balance. But what is Greenwood supplying? Girl that age ought not to have so many troubles, but she did. Looking at it that way, them two was just about made for each other. What is Greenwood supplying? Justification. The quote I just read out comes from Wavy's stepfather. Wavy's mother doesn't mind the relationship between her daughter and a man 15 years her senior, a man she sees every day. There's only one adult who is concerned about Wavy and Callan, and that's Wavy's auntie, the villain of the piece. There is no way to interpret this novel other than to say that it is promoting paedophilia. On Bryn Greenwood's personal blog, she writes about her own sexual experience. I think we must applaud Greenwood for her vulnerability in sharing her story online. I bring them up because I think they add context to the novel. Sexually assaulted as a child, raped as a 19-year-old. When she reported this, the adults did not believe her, and the police told her that she wasn't raped. The first person to believe her story was the nurse at the abortion clinic. Greenwood's first consensual sexual relationship was when she was 13 with a man 10 years older than her. A relationship she described as happy and does not regret. This is the first time Greenwood believes her consent was listened to. This, I think, provides motivation for the novel, and it's a good reminder that even if people are writing problematic things, we don't always know where they are in their journey. It's hard not to see a comparison between Greenwood and the 30-year-old Vanessa, who also doesn't believe she was abused. You might decide to listen to what Greenwood is saying about her consent, or you might think it's textbook denial. I'm going to tell you something. It doesn't matter. As we have already discussed with Lolita, intention doesn't matter once a book is published. The more we are exposed to an idea, the more likely we are to agree with it. Which seems like a very good point in this video essay to mention my Ko-fi account. Support my channel, buy me a coffee. Links in the show notes. The more we are exposed to an idea, the more likely we are to agree with it. The more likely we are to think that it's normal. Regardless of what you think of Greenwood's experience when she was 13, there are undoubtedly other 13-year-old children getting sexually abused right now. And adults who are experiencing the consequences, the trauma, the grief, the depression, the mental illness as a result of being sexually abused as a 13-year-old. The Australian Institute of Criminology reported in 2016 that females aged between the age of 10 and 14 have the highest victimization rate of sexual assault of any age range or gender. Wavy represents that population, the population more likely than anybody else to be sexually abused. I've said it twice because that stat is absurd. That stat is devastating. Stoltenberg and colleagues conducted a meta-analysis of 217 other studies covering almost 10 million participants. This found that 18% of girls had been the victim of sexual assault. However, in some places, this figure was as large as 60%. As a comparison, 7.6% of boys were also the victim of sexual assault. Price Robinson, Broomfield and Vassilo's 2010 summary found that 7 to 12% of girls had been the victim of penetrative sexual assault and 4 to 8% of boys. These numbers are massive. A child is more likely to be sexually abused than they are to have blue eyes, than they are to be left-handed. The number of people in the world who have been sexually assaulted as a child is greater than the entire population of Canada, the United States, Europe, and Russia put together. Should we be creating literature that normalizes the sexual abuse to both the victim and the perpetrator? Should we be telling them that in some cases the child likes it? I can hear the disapproving voices in the comment section now. We don't need authors adding a moral story to the end of their novels. It's not Captain Planet, we're adults. Things are not black and white. Learn to read critically. I'll accept that many issues are not black and white, but I don't accept that paedophilia is one of them. Wavy gave Callan a handjob and couldn't fit her fingers around it. There is no ambiguity. If you want to read a book without morals, there are issues you should avoid. Don't read about racism, abortion, murder, or statutory rape. You cannot normalize a crime, especially a crime damaging and victimizing children, and expect your novel not to be a moralistic novel. Critical reading is a skill. Some readers have it, some don't. Some readers are professional book critics. Some readers are nurses, students, architects, social media managers, retail workers. Some readers are 80, some readers are 14. Some have an academic background, some don't. To expect every reader to be a proficient critical reader is unrealistic. Even if you are a talented critical reader, how often do you gather more insight into a novel just by talking to somebody else about it? The French band Lolita, expecting everybody to be a critical reader is simply detached from the reality of the situation. I am perhaps being unfair levelling all the blame for this novel at the feet of Bryn Greenwood. She's had a traumatic past, she's still learning, and this didn't happen in isolation. All the ugly and wonderful things did not become a bestseller just because of Bryn Greenwood. If Bryn Greenwood wrote it, Pan Macmillan published it, Goodreads viewers voted it the second best work of fiction for 2016. Book of the Month voted it its Book of the Year, and it has received positive reviews from literary critics in Bustle, New York Daily News, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, InStyle UK, Book Riot, The Library Journal, and countless authors. And it didn't even begin the conversation. There was no defending of the ideas in this book. We all know that paedophilia is wrong. But it is so normalized that when it is framed up in a love story, nobody questions it. Nobody bats an eye because we don't question it. We normalize high school students having sex. We want our fashion models to be prepubescent. We expect our politicians and our royals to misbehave. But we wouldn't want to ruin their lives, just the children they abuse, because they're the dispendable ones. We encourage these children to be submissive and obedient. While there are examples of women assaulting children, it isn't a surprise that between 90 to 95% of the perpetrators are adult men, because that is what the media tells us is normal. That is what society accepts. Nabokov saw predators. He made them feel uncomfortable. He drew attention to them. And Lolita was banned. Russell centered the victims and showed the damages done to them. And My Dark Vanessa is controversial. But Bryn Greenwood wrote Paedophile Apologetica, and it's dangerous, shocking, and unexpected. Bustle magazine. A strange but strangely grabbing tale. Harry Levin's St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So freakishly good and dangerous that it should come with a warning label. Library Journal. Does the author have an ethical obligation regarding what they write, or is that obligation solely placed upon the reader? I would say that the author does have an ethical obligation, but that obligation is shared with the publisher, the editor, the media, and all of us. We shouldn't be silent on a book that normalizes the rape of a minor. We shouldn't casually let it go by, and we certainly shouldn't idolize it. We have to say something and not be scared that somebody will disagree with our interpretation, because this isn't a call to cancel Bryn Greenwood. This is a call to cancel the normalization of grooming, statutory rape, and paedophilia. If you or somebody you know have been affected by these subjects of this video, please seek help. I'll include some links to various support services in the show notes. Please stay safe. And if you've got to the end of this video and you're not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Bye bye.